So, thoughtful is an interesting conversation where we might learn something from the person that I'm speaking to, or it might be that they're really relatable. But the idea is that it's someone interesting and that it might make you think afterwards. So, I'm here with Clover Stroud, and we're mostly, I think, probably going to chat some motherhood stuff today because I've been reading my Wild and Sleepless Nights, which is your latest book, although I think you're literally about to pump out another one.
I'm
Um,
just finishing another one, yeah.
when's it due out?
It's due out in March next year, so
Okay,
March
you've got a
2021.
bit of time to breathe.
Mm.
But this one, we stopped this at Don't Buy Her Flowers, and a couple of people have said to me, "Oh, you really should read it," because, and I mean, to just reading the reviews page at the front is hysterical in terms of how many amazing names you've got there, but also they all say the same thing, which is like, this is the only thing I've read which really grasps what motherhood feels like, or and how honest it is. And I just thought that's it's ridiculous, really. I mean, it's brilliant that you are able to do that, but also it's crazy that that's how people have feel about what's said about motherhood.
Yeah, it is completely bizarre. And I did write it because I couldn't find the book that I wanted to read, which was a sort of pure description of what it feels like to be a mum, and not just a mum to like pregnant and baby and toddlers, which is, has been explored in quite a lot of books, but
Mm.
the whole range basically. And I was sort of inspired because I'd had my newborn baby, who was my fifth child. I think I was 41, and my then teenage son, who was about 14, 15, was kind of crashing into adolescence. And I had, another four kids, and I had five kids in total. So I was experiencing like all of the newborn stuff at the same time that I was kind of white knuckle riding it through into adolescence with Jimmy, of like, oh my God. And I wanted to describe what it really feels like, and the kind of emotional elevation of it, and how extraordinary it is, and how it makes you feel as though versions of yourself have been found, but also how horrific it is, and how lost you are, and how confused by the fact that you can feel these things at the same time, and how boring it is, and how funny it can be, and how kind of sensual it can be, how passionate it can be. Those were the things that I wanted to communicate, that I couldn't find all in one place. I could find bits of some of them in different places.
But I
Um,
think that contradiction is
mm,
the biggest thing. And when you get lots of new mums like, oh, no one told me it was like this, and it's like because you
yeah,
can't. It's very hard to explain how you can feel. Like you talk about the newborn wanting to be there and feed them and touch them and
mm,
sniff them, and that passion,
mm,
but also I'm fucking exhausted and I want to be away from all of you
mm,
right now.
mm.
It's nothing is as divisive as that, I don't think.
And also how I'm in a kind of state of emotional confusion as well. That feeling of like unease after you've had a baby, of like the deep love that you have for them, but the what I felt like, which I was actually talking about, how lockdown makes you feel a bit as well, of like unease, and a sense that life is never going to be the same again, that it's profoundly changed, and that kind of feeling of psychological disturbance. It's like you aren't psychologically disturbed, and I think you should be psychologically disturbed after you've had a baby, because you've just kind of been to the brink of life and death. That's
Mm.
something I find so interesting actually about childbirth itself, and the fact that there's so little said about, you're going into the cosmic realm when you have a baby, in whichever way that baby comes out, you're doing something really, really cosmic and out there. A human being is exiting your body to start a new life.
Still, I've had three, and I'm still like, I can't get my head around it. It's crazy. Did you watch it's The Handmaid's Tale?
I started watching that, and then I just found it a bit too
It's pretty
grueling.
heavy, but
Yeah.
there's a scene where she has a baby later on, and it's probably again it's the only depiction I've seen of what childbirth, because it's so raw, and she's on
Yeah.
her own
Yeah.
in a empty house, and it's all a bit weird, but because it's the physical, the noise, I mean, I moved the whole way through, the sounds and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
again, the version that we see, and you see it so much because it's just spewed out in films and books and articles and everything else, is so sanitized and so
Yeah.
different to what it
Yeah.
actually is, that it's no wonder that you then feel completely unprepared because
Mm,
you're trying to look like you think everyone else
mm,
has
mm.
experienced it.
No, I think with childbirth there should be more kind of education about the fact that, I mean, I'm really lucky. I've had 5 amazing births. I've had, they've all been incredible experiences. They've also been fucking terrifying
Mm.
and excruciatingly painful. I've like shat myself.
Oh
There's been
yeah.
fluid coming out of myself. I've thought that I was dying. I've thought that I was having an out of body experience. That is a normal experience of childbirth. That wasn't childbirth gone wrong. That was a good childbirth. So I think that we go in thinking, yeah, it's going to be this kind of, it's going to be something. Maybe it's going to be painful. Maybe it's going to be a bit scary. But to know how you're slamming into a whole different kind of
Yeah.
realm of physical emotional existence, I think maybe would be helpful to women a bit more about that. And it's difficult because you also don't want to scare people
Yeah.
as well, do you?
So one of my best mates is, we've all just turned 40 and we had a weekend away, which was so good. And just because everyone needed it so much, but she is having her first baby and the rest of us have got kids. And when we started talking about childbirth, and it's funny, like we're laughing about, one of the girls was talking about being led by her placenta across the room, while no, the placenta, sorry, was still inside her and they're holding the baby, but leading her across the ward. And we're killing ourselves laughing. She's doing an impression of this waddle, going, "Fuck, I don't know what's happening," because it was her first baby. And my friend sitting there, I was like, does this make you feel weird? And she's like, "I don't know, because I kind of want the information, but also it sounds awful." Like, but at least you know,
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
think I even really understood that the placenta was still attached or any
yeah.
of that. Like,
And the placenta is like that massive piece of meat suddenly that
oh,
comes out of you.
yeah. Yeah, but I think also the postnatal depression that
Yeah,
you write about, because I think again the way that it's talked about, it's just and it is, at least it's talked about, because obviously it wasn't maybe 40, 50 years ago, but it's depicted as this dark depression, which actually I think you describe it as knowing when it's coming. When I think you're talking about worrying about whether are going to have it with your fifth baby, and you talked about knowing it's coming when the tears come too easily, or you feel like a blank sense of separation from the rest of the world. And I was reading that and I was like, oh my god, that is exactly how it feels. So it's not like, because you still would have been coping, you still would have been coping, you still would have been feeding the kids,
yeah,
dressing them.
yeah.
Most people's postnatal depression, they're still surviving,
Yeah,
but
and I think that's why a lot of people don't realize they've even got it, and
yeah,
people around them don't realize they've got it because they sort of, you can look as though you're quite normal, but that feeling of being present but absent in the room at the same
yeah,
time is incredibly scary, and knowing how to pull yourself out of it is incredibly scary. And with my fifth, I mean, I'd had it with my third and my fourth. My third, it was really bad because I just didn't know what was happening. And it was when I identified the fact about 4 months into it that I was really depressed.
how did you identify it?
It was actually my husband,
Mm.
really. I think I was kind of really pretending that everything was okay. I'd had 2 kids in my 20s. I'd got divorced. Life had been quite chaotic, but actually quite good fun as well. Had a few different boyfriends, and then I met Pete, who I'm married to now, who I totally adore. And we had a baby, and she was this, perfect, lovely little baby. And there was a lot of people saying, "Oh, your life has finally worked out after all that chaos, and how wonderful for you. You must be so happy." And I remember just thinking, yeah, I must be so happy. Am I happy? Am I happy? Like,
Mm.
should I be happy? And I think I was trying really hard to create the feeling of, and the impression to other people, oh yes, this is all working. As I think many of us do when we've had a baby. It's often something you've really wanted, or a baby is longed for often, and that feeling of, actually, I'm really lost. And I think that's where the like sense of psychological disturbance, understanding that it is about a sort of, for me, it was like a huge psychological unease. And she was born in September, and about December, I was kind of really unraveling. And Pete just like looked at me one day and said, like, "You're not there, are you?"
Mm.
Makes me feel quite emotional remembering
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
actually.
God, me too.
And then I took part in a sort of voluntary, we were living in Oxford, and I found a kind of some voluntary research where they were offering cognitive behavioural therapy for free. So I got loads of, because I think also one of the things is like treatment is to go and buy lots of sessions with a therapist. It would have been too expensive for
Yeah,
me at that stage.
yeah.
So I think it was about 12 sessions with a cognitive behavioural therapist in a study they were doing about postnatal depression. And that really, really helped to kind of be able to see myself as a mother and to analyse what was going on.
Mm.
And it was through that, but it was, it took a long time. I think it took about a year probably to feel better. And I sometimes still think I get postnatal depression. And my
Yeah.
youngest
Anyway,
child,
is this perimenopause? Is this
yeah,
depression? Postnatal? How long could this same something like this? Well, I think this year as well has been so testing in so
mm,
many
mm,
ways that
mm.
it's like, yeah, you can't quite work out. Or is this just life? Is this just how I
Right.
feel?
I mean, I think that some of it is just life, actually, as well. I
Yeah.
think that, like, to understand how difficult life is really hard. It's full of huge challenges, and you just think that everything is going okay, and then,
Mm.
the wheels fall off in some way or another that you couldn't possibly have predicted.
Yeah.
And kind of knowing that no feeling is final. I read a lot of poetry, actually. That's what helps me emotionally a lot, is reading poetry. And there's German poet called Rilke who writes amazingly about death. But one of the things he says is like no feeling is final, and it's such an important thing to remember that when you are really, really struggling, just as joy is never final as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the bit because also that we spend all our time going, well, the aim is joy. That's where we've
Yeah,
got to get to, and maybe this is what happens when you in your 40s that you go, that's bullshit because that's not sustainable, and
yeah,
life will keep happening.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I look back at my life in my 20s and I had been through a lot emotionally because my mum had had a big accident which left her profoundly brain damaged. My family had changed radically because of that. I'd been through some big traumas, but when
Oh,
I look at my 20s and 30s, I didn't really know what was going on. I mean, I still don't know what's going on at all. I'm 46, I've got no idea what's going on, but I've got a little bit more of a sense of just my stepmother, who I'm really close to, always just says, on we go. And I think it's quite a useful thing to remember, just, just
yeah,
on we go, kind of keep
yeah,
swinging forward as much as you can through the difficult times, and try and identify the good time when it's happening, even if it's just like for a few moments. Identify it because it's valuable. It's so
yeah.
valuable.
I think I'm really bad for, and I think so. I mean, you've got another couple of kids on me, but I think I've got three kids in the business, and I feel like I'm on a treadmill, like a race, and it's
Yeah,
like I've just got to get that done and that done and that done, that, and then you're looking around the house going, oh, and that needs doing, and that needs doing, oh, and that needs replacing. Like it's that,
yeah.
and I know I need to. I think that's what I'm in of life. I know I need to stop and enjoy some bits a bit more.
Enjoy some bits of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
How old are your kids?
3, 8, and 10. So I feel a
Yeah,
bit like I've got two very different stages because
yeah,
the 8 and 10, especially the 10-year-old, he's turning into something different. It's that point where you go, oh, you're moving away from me, and I can feel it compared to the 3-year-old who
yeah,
bundles in and is there and he's
yeah.
like, oh my gosh, the whole time. They're so different.
Mm,
And that's really interesting. Like
mm.
just to try and figure out and give them both what they need and feel
Yes.
like you're constantly failing at it. But like the 10-year-old is less likely to ask for it, so it's that thing where you're like, well, if they're quiet they're okay when they're smaller. If everything's okay, if they're quiet then everything's fine, and then you realize now it's because something's not okay and they need more from you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they need. My 20-year-old has just. I mean, he was, forced home for a year. He was supposed to be off at university, but he decided
Yeah,
and then he was working locally for a gardener. He saved up some money, and he and a friend are driving around the country in a van. So for the first time, I do feel genuinely that he is off doing his
yeah,
thing. But through the last few years, I mean, I feel really, really lucky to be close to him. He has he's quite rebellious, and he's brilliantly good fun, but he's also needed me, and I've needed him actually as well, in the last few years. So it isn't as though they suddenly become teenagers and then, oh, that's job done, off you
yeah,
go,
yeah, yeah,
at
yeah,
all. And in order to maintain, I think, a kind of healthy, vibrant, strong relationship, you need to, as you do with anybody, you need to kind of talk to them and see them and
okay,
have times together
yeah,
and communicate.
We had an optician's appointment actually, and I realised that we hadn't been on our own for quite a while,
Yeah.
and we had to wait while they were doing something. And I was like, "Should we go and get an ice cream?" And he was like, "Yeah." And it's just, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I've really mixed," because he used to be my whole world. He was my firstborn, and that was that when you have that first baby, and it's so intense, and it's weird to think, yeah, it just changes. But I'm learning. It's like going, oh, okay, that's just a really different kind of motherhood to
Yeah.
the 3-year-old. But yeah, and you're right about that, and having them happen simultaneously, the kind of chaos of that. But it's interesting. But with the postnatal depression, I think just that idea of talking about it and writing honestly about it. And you talk a little bit about your relationship as well, and the rage, like the feeling of rage. And there was a bit about a life raft. Can I read it?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but because I was reading it, and again, it made me feel emotional because I like say similarly. I think I love Doug, my husband, and he was the first man who I met that I was like, oh, this is the one. This is what it's meant to be, and all that stuff. But I'm awful to him when it's that rage and he comes in and he's been away and all that stuff. But I wrote a note to myself because it's easy to forget these things. When motherhood is drowning you, Pete is your life raft. Do not attempt to smash him to pieces because you're angry. Cling to him. Be his life raft through these stormy waters too. And I was like, oh, that is so spot on, because that is exactly, I smash
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah, you sort of go into the room together and you're like a couple of crocodiles or something, like thrashing around, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah,
And that thing of like, me and Pete are, he's away a lot for his
yeah,
work as well.
yeah.
Even during the pandemic, he's just been away for 3 months, and he told me last night that he was probably going to have to go away for another month in
Oh,
July, and I practically just lay down on the floor and wept, actually.
I'm not
But
surprised.
and then you come back together, and whether that's a day apart or 3 months apart, you come back together and you carry expectations and resentment towards one another, and it's bloody difficult not to do that. So I think actually you should be allowed to do that. I don't think you should try and suppress that or kind of just get rid of it. I think you should be allowed to articulate, this has been really, really difficult for me, and his work is really stressful. My work is quite stressful. Looking after children is very stressful. We are carrying our own different kind of stresses. They are not the same. The stresses that we're under are not the same at all.
No.
And it's very easy to say to each other, you haven't got a fucking clue what I'm dealing with. And no, I don't have a clue what his work is like, really, what it's like being, him for. I see him doing it. I know what it's like. And he hasn't got a fucking clue what it's like being on your own for 3 months and dealing with all the kids and their birthdays and Easter and everything without him there.
Yeah.
And I think being able to kind of say that, but understand that if you have that connection, if you have that sense of that person being the one who you want to be with, who you want to talk to, who you like having sex with, who makes you laugh, then that is just so valuable. And I'm really interested by commitment and what commitment is, and how it can take you further, and how it can kind of, I think it obviously, being in a committed relationship it doesn't have a very sort of exciting it's not about
Sexy
excitement.
stuff. No, I've got multiple friends getting divorced, and they are having a great time.
Having a really, really great time. Yeah. No, but I also think that there is a way in which it can be really, really exciting. There is a narrative which says, boring, dirty towels on the floor, never have sex, complete boredom with one another. How am I going to do another 40 years of this? There is a very strong kind of narrative that people talk about. But then there is also something that I've been thinking about, of like, okay, we are fully committed to each other. That allows us to really kind of take risks with each other as well. That allows us to be completely emotionally naked before one another. And how can you have like a proper connection? And I think, how can you have proper sex actually, unless you are emotionally naked as well as actually naked, probably as well. But and that feeling of completely revealing yourself to somebody, all of the very worst stuff of yourself, and then seeing where you can go after that, is quite an exciting feeling. And it's a risky feeling. You're risking your entire life with this person. And I think that um for me is a kind of way to understand more about commitment, and more about relationships, and more about how we must value each, kind of be the rifle off and support each other. It's something I've just been thinking about quite a lot actually recently.
Yeah, because I think what the relationship that we would like now is very different to the relationship that was a traditional marriage again 50 years ago. So I think we're learning how it works because we have it's totally about, I mean, a lot of it is about expectations. Like my mum will say, oh, your dad was wonderful, he'd get up with the babies in the night, and I'm like, damn right he's getting up with the babies in the night. There's not even a I'm
Yeah,
not going to praise him for that. Why should
yeah,
I? So, and it's so different. But I think you also write about in your book about how um it's it is imbalanced. As soon as you have a baby, it's imbalanced because only you can do that.
yeah. There is no way it
How do we have
feels.
that equality? Like, it's complicated.
Yeah, and you can't demand. Well, I haven't been able to achieve. I might have demanded it loudly, smashing a mug at the same time. Of course, but it often is like you just can't. Somebody's going to lose out, and it was probably going to be the children. You can't. Sometimes Peter said, "Well, let's just, you know, get a send them all off into full time care, not full time care, but full time childcare, and get more people in to help." But then, no, that's not the solution to this problem as
No.
well. The
And
children need
I
to be
get told that, well, as a
taught.
business owner, I get told that all the time. If I go to an event and there's women and they're probably 10 years older than me, but they'll be like, oh, you must get a nanny. That's the, I had a nanny. She used to come, so I didn't have to be there from this hour till this hour. And that's how you do it. And we haven't. We've gone, it's nursery and a hodgepodge of like after school clubs and
Yeah,
that jigsaw puzzle of
yeah.
someone is picking up a kid somewhere. But we are, and like, when my kids are moaning about going to after school clubs, I was like, look around at the other children, and you'll see that actually it's always me and dad. We are always the one because that's what we've chosen, and this is how we're trying to make it work. Whereas a lot of them, yeah, it'll be a nanny or a grandparent and
Mm.
it's not easy. It's just a kind of we're just trying to figure it out. I think.
Yeah, I think also that is really, really true. Trying to figure it out, and it's a continual kind of like reevaluation and sort of. I mean, childcare. I have used different forms of childcare. I've never had a proper nanny. I've sometimes had au pairs when the kids were younger, which actually used to work really well. Now teenage children were younger au pairs, and I was very, I was living completely on a very low income, basically. I was able to afford an au pair who came to live with us. The children slept in bed with me, and the au pair slept in the one spare bedroom because that was actually much cheaper than nursery, and it worked really, really well. But it was also, sometimes you'd have completely random people turning up to look after your children. And that bit in Motherland, I've been watching Motherland, that bits of Motherland, I have problems with certain
Yeah.
aspects of it, but I do think bits of it are very, very funny. And there's a bit where she's interviewing different people to come and look after the children. And this woman, she says, "Well, can you start now?" And the woman said, "Well, shouldn't I meet the children first?" And that kind of desperation that you sometimes feel that you've got to get some work done, you've got to find somebody to look after the kids. And in my case, sometimes it's been like the teenage friends, or
Yeah.
somebody whose child is at university and is finding it really difficult. Well, just come and live with us and help me for a bit. It's always a bit of a chaos, and I think that's also sort of okay as well. And it is a constant kind of, yeah, it's a constant trying to make it work. And then the child gets a bit older and something changes.
Changes.
But
Yeah, yeah. My 10-year-old he's now really not agreeing with like after school clubs, and I'm like, well, you've only got like a year, and you won't have to do them anymore anyway. But
yeah,
it's funny how it changed. Whereas they used to love it, they used to kind of skip in, which made me feel less guilty about
yeah,
the whole setup. But and you with chaos and mess. So I think I'm realizing as one because I have five siblings. So my parents have four, and then they did fostering and adopting, and we had kids on remand from prison. I like it was just chaos, it was chaos. It was,
yeah.
but I remember. I think I found it all quite exciting. Like it was annoying at times, but it was also exciting. And I think I always felt quite like impressive when someone go, "Oh, how many brothers?" Oh, you're five.
Yeah,
But there's something because it's so many that it
yeah,
makes people kind of, oh wow, and they know that you can almost imagine it.
yes,
But do you think you've been just drawn to that?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm one of five as well. So I would say, I've got four siblings when people ask, which, that's, I know exactly what you mean. There's something like sort of surprising about it. And there should be, I suppose, a sense that you've got this kind of gang around, you've got a kind of your own inbuilt sort of artillery or something around you.
Yeah.
There's a big age gap between me and my eldest sister, and relationships will change enormously as family life changes and you get older and you have your own children and so on. But I think that I mean, after I had Jimmy and Dolly in my 20s, and then I got divorced, and I was doing a lot of journalism, I was supporting myself as a journalist, and I thought at 29, well, that was actually quite well organised of me. I didn't realise when I went into this chaotic marriage and ended up as a single mother at 27. But I'm now 30. I've got like a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my work's beginning to kind of happen. And this looks like I've actually maybe I made it was the right choice. It wasn't like a ridiculous out of control life choice to have a baby at 24. And I didn't think I'd have more children particularly. I thought this is it. But obviously 30 is actually really, really young. And then I met Pete, and it was just completely natural to want to have more children. And friends have said, yeah, well, I get that. You could just have had one more child. You had 3 children in
Or
quick.
2.
No, I could have had 2. And I was talking to somebody else about this actually. 2 to me would have felt like really, really neat. I had a boy and a girl, and then I had another boy and a girl. And lots of people said, oh, you've got like the perfect family, which is obviously such a ridiculous thing to say that was a perfect family. But there was a neatness that people liked, and I wanted a kind of messiness, I suppose. And I think I do kind of thrive. I think I thrive in kind of quite adverse circumstances, and I thrive under pressure.
Yeah.
But I've got a friend who says she really likes being with couples where they've already split up, and it's like a second husband or second wife, and different children between different families. She says it's much less pressure being with families like that, because it's already all broken up. There's not that kind of like huge kind of pressure to keep it all together and keep it all perfect and make it all work. There's a feeling. She said, well, there's already all blood all over the floor. It's fine. We know that we're in this state of things break up. And I kind of really, really understand that as well. There's a kind of openness and expansiveness to it. And yeah, I think for me, it was a kind of, I have had a lot of traumatic experiences. I think there is also a sort of resistance to, or an assertion of life, an assertion of, of that I am living despite what's happening around me. And my sister died 18 months ago, and I was almost tempted to have another baby, to just like assert life over death in a way.
Yeah.
I say almost because I don't think I could have another baby without just completely losing my mind, probably. But that need for the kind of messiness, the need for a sense of the funniness. I've got a friend who's got a big family, and she says it's like random anarchy, and I love that feeling of the kind of random anarchy of it. At the same time, I find it really, really difficult. Sometimes people say to me, oh, you're such a natural, you've got 5 children.
You must love it.
No, I don't love it any more than anybody at all, but I do feel that I can cope with it. I can just cope with it.
It's interesting, the idea that you thrive in the kind of, because I think when if something gets under control, I like subconsciously I think I add another thing in.
Yeah.
And my husband would be like, what's happening? Like, why are we doing this now? But I haven't really, it's taken me like 40 years to work out that's what I'm doing. Because I think I like a plan. I like to know what's happening. I like to be organised. But it's also chaos. I can't quite work out how I like life.
That's because of your upbringing in a chaotic, funny,
I still want that, but I also need to know what's happening, and the two don't really marry. I mean, it's just the state of the house as well. Like you see other people's houses, and how are they doing that? I walked past the stairs a few days ago, and there was a big greenie dried encrusted onto the wall, and I was like, I don't even know how long that's been there, and I didn't immediately get rid of it because I was like, who's done that? Why have they done that? And how many people have seen that on my wall? Luckily no one's been round, but it's just like, it's never going to be
No,
beautiful.
it's, and also you get used to. We did a house swap last week for half term, and it was actually totally brilliant. And
Oh,
then
it
when
looked amazing.
it was brilliant. But just before we swapped, I started cleaning the house, and it sort of suddenly makes you look at the house in a
And you
new
realise how
way.
disgusting it is.
Yeah, no. And they're weird things you're living with, of like washing machines by the back door, and I don't
Yeah,
know, just like bits of chaos that are just completely normal. And
yeah,
then suddenly looking where the knives and forks all are, and shit, I need to clean that drawer out. Look, it's full of kind of crisps
so
and
disgusting. Yeah, yeah.
um, and I think, yes, trying to sort of see your own life through somebody else's eyes shocked me a bit, definitely.
It's better not to, I think.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think, but it's but do you think? Because I was reading Penny Winter's book and she talked about self compassion, and and it really resonated because I think, and I'm guessing with 5 children and traumas and things as well, that like you write about going to the shop and forgetting your purse and having to like talk yourself down from that being like the biggest fuck up you could have possibly made because you just forgot your purse. And
Hmm.
that she writes about that idea of self-compassion, so that instead of dwelling on it and making it worse and
Hmm.
seeing yourself as the worst person because of this thing that's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And I just thought, God, that's so true. And I think with my third I finally did have more of that. Like we had a doula who was just the most amazing woman, she cared for me. She came
Right.
in and I'd never had to ask. I think it's probably the first time in my life where I never had to say, can you just, she just did stuff.
Hmm.
And I was talking about the other day and started weeping and was like, because it was somebody really looked after me when I really needed it, because I had a small baby and there was, loads of stuff
Hmm.
going on. And I thought, yeah, that was an act of self-compassion, to go, what do I need? And do
Yeah.
you think you've got better at that?
A little bit, a little bit. It is a real conscious thing, isn't it, to try and make it happen. I was feeling really, really bad about something yesterday. Really like, oh my God, I could feel myself going into a depression. And I am aware now of what the feel, like the postnatal depression. I do know what it feels like. So this morning, I've got a horse. I made an effort to get up and go for a ride and not think about this thing, to just like allow myself some time. And that might have been also putting myself to bed early and having a bath, or
Mm.
going for a run, or just lying on the bed actually, and kind of you know allowing yourself to rest, I suppose. So I think, and I said to Pete, I'm going to get the horse in because I need to do some work. I need to do it for mental health, basically. I need to kind of do something which feels right and nice for me, which I know is the thing that I love doing, which is being around the animals and being outdoors, and it's lovely weather. So I think that um, I think it's crucially important. I think probably it's crucially important when you've got young children.
Mm.
It's probably crucially important in the stage in, I mean, I'm 46, I'm a bit older than you, but like this bit that we're going into now of kind of, and I'm quite interested by what's about to happen emotionally with the menopause and so on. I'm kind of like I'm always thinking, what, yeah, exactly as we were saying earlier,
Waiting.
what is that? And is that the perimenopause that's making me feel so
I'm
weird at the
relieved it's being discussed.
moment?
I'm wondering if instead of the way that in the way that motherhood is being discussed
Mm.
more honestly than it was, perhaps this conversation, it's the same generation who are now going, oh, now we're into this phase.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it will be less awful because we're not just trying to hide it or go, oh, look at those silly women having a hot flush,
yeah,
which was how we've treated my mum entirely. I can remember her sitting at the kitchen table and us all laughing at her.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
terrible.
No, it is. It is. I think it's really great that there's podcasts, there's more books. Sam
Yeah,
Baker's written that book,
yeah.
which has just been out, which has been really, really helpful, I think. And there is more awareness and thought about it, definitely. And I think, as there is with motherhood, actually, there have been various books in the last, around about the time of my book and just after my book, there has been more stuff being written, a bit more honestly about it. And I suppose that Instagram is, I mean, it's funny, Instagram, 'cause it's so helpful in so many ways, and it's so damaging in so many ways. But I think
Exactly.
it is
So
probably,
such a mix.
yeah. But I think that it's and the way it does truly enable you to connect with people and connect with your emotional experiences in a sort of fast, communal way
Mm.
is really, really helpful. For me, it's definitely been really, really, really helpful. Although I did partly write My Wild and Sleepless Nights as a reaction to against some of the stuff that I saw on Instagram about motherhood that just I found so bizarre, and it made me feel so alienated, and it made me think, that doesn't look like my experience of motherhood at all. So at all. And I
But the
remember,
fact that then so many people have said that what you've written is like, oh my God, that is me. It's like someone's in my head. So it's
yeah,
no one's experience is the one that's being shown.
no, I know. And it's very weird, isn't it, that that experience that nobody's actually having is being presented as the one that we should all be having.
Like the massive trend for, I know it's probably a couple of years, but for cleaning and
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, what? Are we on? It feels so bizarre. I can't imagine why that is of interest. And it's so opposite to where I feel like women are trying to go.
Mm,
And
mm,
yet that was massive.
mm,
It's
mm,
really strange to get your head
mm,
around, I think.
mm. No, and I think it's really important. I think Instagram can be a really, really big force for the good. And I think trying to be honest about the emotional experiences behind it as well is really important. But there's a responsibility, I think, actually, if you're posting. I mean, there's just fun posts, but if you're posting something, to kind of be as, I hate the word real, because kind of what is real, what's on.
Authentic. I think
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think you've said you're not a particularly private person, and I
No,
don't think
no,
I've
not
ever
at
heard
all.
anyone say that. But I'm not either. So
Mm.
you kind of get what I could be telling. So I had an exercise thing last night, and I mentioned that my coil has got lost, and the
Oh,
women.
I lost a coil. That's how I had my third child,
No,
actually.
don't tell. Well, my husband's had a vasectomy, so we're all right. But I went to have the thing, and they're like down there with the everything's open, and they're doing. She's like, no, I can't find it. I'll have another go, and they're going down. I was like, fuck's sake, what is like? And also, it's another thing because it was on my list to go and have done, and then
Mm,
like, right, I've got to now go for an ultrasound.
mm.
And I was telling the women, and they were all giggling because they're like, it's funny, but also some of them, it's just like, oh, are we saying that in a group outside, a group setting outdoors? But I'm like, well, it's not embarrassing. It's not anything I've done. It's not. It's funny how
No,
different.
I think that that sort of perception of shame, I suppose, as well, because people have definitely said, my Wild and Sleepless Nights, and also The Wild Other, is about everything in my heart, in my head, the way I feel about my body, my marriage, my husband, my children, not, yeah, my children, it's got everything in it. I haven't, and sometimes when I meet people, I'm talking, I'll be saying, oh, I've got a son who's this age, and they'll go, oh, yeah, no, I know, yeah, I know, because I've put,
Yeah, that's always
or
weird.
he did this, and they know, people know everything, but I don't, and I've written very explicitly about drugs and sex and addiction and so on, but I don't feel ashamed of any of it, and I don't feel I should be made to feel ashamed of any of it, because what I'm describing is totally universal human experiences. The female experience is, but the male experience, the entire human experience,
Mm.
and people will be able to find bits of themselves. I mean, they might not find anything of themselves there, but I know that a lot of people have found bits of themselves there because of the messages I've got about it.
Yeah.
And I think freeing ourselves from a sense that we should feel ashamed of losing our coils, or wanting to like have sex with somebody randomly, or not wanting to have sex with somebody randomly, or having taken drugs, or feeling like we want to kill our baby, or feeling, those are not things to feel ashamed of, because a lot of people have done that. A lot of people have done that. And when you say this is what I've done, and people say, oh yes, then I've done it as well, I think it is incredibly liberating, and it's incredibly freeing for a lot of people.
And
And
connecting, that sense of
yeah,
community and connection is like that's what humanity is meant to be.
yeah,
That's what's been
definitely.
missing when we haven't been able to share those stories and sit and laugh about the ridiculous stuff.
Definitely, definitely. And I've had so many amazing messages, and that's one thing I love about Instagram, is that I get so many messages of people saying, your books are really, really helping me to understand something about myself, or they're helping me to understand, my brother, or they're helping me to connect more with my husband, they're helping me to understand that I'm not going mad, these feelings I have about my children, they're helping me to find more joy in my life. And knowing that they are kind of helping people to live a fuller human life, then that's really motivating as a writer, because obviously as a writer it is kind of um, difficult and lonely sitting in your room on your own writing. And I've just written this book about death and what it's like to live, for what it's been like for me to go from my sister dying and life feeling unbearable and intolerable and as though I would die myself, to sitting here with you and having a great conversation and feeling, generally quite positive about some things. And
That's what you do. I think you do it on your Instagram feed as well, because it could be a joyous picture with your family together, and then it might be a reflection on about now, and
yeah.
and grief, and the fact that you're still in it, which of course you are, because it's your sister and it's 18 months later and there's been a pandemic and all of that stuff. But it's almost like in life we're meant to have, right, that one's done, then you move on to
Yeah.
the next one, which is not, grief isn't that at all.
No, no, it really isn't. And it's just as in the days immediately after her death, there were moments of hilarity.
Mm.
There are, even though this awful thing had happened, there are still big times in my life of utter pain and desperation and loss. And I think I will always feel that. I'm sure if I have a long life, and none of us know how long our lives will be, I will always be missing her, and I'll always be wishing that she could see things that are going on and be present and talk. I wish I could talk to her about things, but also life does go on. That's what's weird and kind of awful and brilliant at the same time. This feeling of like it does just keep rolling forwards, and you have to kind of go with that motion. Because my after she died, the desire to go backwards, to desire to kind of reach back to where she was and was so strong. It was kind of shatteringly strong. And how do I take my life forward with my children and with Pete and my work? And that's what the book is about, is really trying to like, well, actually, one of the reasons, in the same way that I wanted to write a book about what motherhood really feels like, I wanted to write a book about what grief really, 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 and death really feels like, being close to death. And so many people said after Nell died, I can't begin to imagine what you're going through, which I found a very interesting and alienating and upsetting phrase, because it's like,
Then you're even more on your
I'm not
own.
even on my own. Is it that, it's so awful that you can't begin to imagine it. So then I thought, well, fuck it, I'm going to write a book about what it's like, because you can
But
read
because
it and
everybody,
then,
it's like the one guarantee in life. Like
yes.
obviously, some people are having it when they, going through that when they're younger or not. But it's the one thing that is definitely going to happen to everyone, and yet it's not. And I think the way people are as you're growing up about death as well, which must have been difficult because of your mum.
Mm.
The way people talk about death and everything like that also has an impact on how you then handle
Mm.
things.
Mm. Yeah, and I would really like to kind of break open more of the conversation around death, and more of our kind of, we are pretending all the time that it's not something that is going to happen, and we are all traveling towards exactly the same destination. We just don't know how fast we're going to get there. So
I know.
let's kind of think about it, and let's have conversations about it, and let's talk to our kids about it, so that it's not a horror film, that it's
It
part
might
of
not be
life.
so scary. I suppose it might not be so scary, so it's still going to be awful, but it might not be. My mum, I went home a few months ago. My mum had a book out that said, what happens when I'm gone, and it was this big sort of ledger, and I was like, God, Mum, is there something? And she's like, No, I'm just making some notes, and it had like,
That's so good.
I know, but I didn't realise how good it was until I started thinking about this more. And she had sections where you could write like what you want at your funeral, anything you want to be left, to be passwords, all this stuff. And that's so my mum. She's very matter of fact about it. She'd always be like, oh well, if I'm old, it's fine, and that kind of way. Or just, yeah, but it's really interesting, because I think that then has affected my view of things, and it's very different to my husband's family, where death is this awful, just
Mm.
regardless of how it's happened, who it's happened to. And she's just always, I mean, around our house we've got names on the back of things where we've where we've been having a gin, and then like someone will go, I want that one, and you go and put your name on the back, and she's like, yeah, divvy it up, because there's 6 of us. She's like, it's going to be ever such a mess, so if you but it's quite interesting that it's just such a different vibe to anyone I know who talking about death.
I think that's totally brilliant, and I'm sure that it will help you later in life, and the kind of feeling of, and I wish I'd had more conversations, Nell, about what do you think happens, and do you think we'll see each other, and do you believe in heaven or an afterlife, or do you believe this is it? But she didn't really want to talk about that, and she also had cancer, and then when she had secondary cancer, you cannot make somebody who doesn't want to talk about death
No.
talk about death. Of course you can't. So that's why it feels so much more important to like talk about it well before it's too late, basically. Is and and I wish that I just wish that I had a memory of me and her saying, yeah, this is where I think I'm going to go, or if you see this thing, you know, maybe it will be me, you know, if you see a sparrow or whatever, because that kind of, I think it would help life and death to join up together a bit more. They're so kind of separate, basically. And I was with a friend recently, an older friend, you know, a couple of days before she died, and seeing her just reminded me so closely of giving birth and those edges that we're on. And it was incredible to be with her just 2 days before she died, and it was incredibly sad. But that sort of sense of life and death being, or birth and death being a very, very similar physical experience, could be a very similar physical experience. The kind of, I did feel as though she was being born into something else, you know, and I did feel optimistic about that. Um, and I think the more that we can talk about it, I mean, I talk about it with my kids a lot now, and we go to my sister's grave and we go and hang out there and have a picnic there, and we try and kind of honour her and not embody her, because you can't do that obviously, unfortunately, but to kind of be really as present to her as it is possible to be, without being morbid as well, for it to be kind of
Yeah,
fun,
yeah, yeah.
joyful.
That's brilliant. Oh well, I'm looking forward to that. So March. So you've just got to finish some edits now.
Yeah, literally today I've got to finish them,
Okay.
and yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's a really powerful book, I think, and it's not so much about grief, it's about death and life, because I think that grief, people think, oh gosh, you know, so many books
And
about grief.
that's very, it's so varied depending who you are, I think, as
Yeah,
well.
and it's a very sort of grey, dark experience. But my experience of death, of Nell's death, is that it can kind of smash life open. It can be very colourful and very creative, very painful, but that kind of, the sort of, the kind of bright lights and colours that come with it are can be something positive as well in the pain of it. So that's what I'm kind of trying to write about. Yeah, it's called The Red of My Blood, and it's going to be out next year.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Clover. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
It's been totally lovely talking to you. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Just
Thank you
gonna
very, very much.